This is Daniel Poppy, host of How to Write Good. Thanks for listening to the following broadcast on Public House Media.
This is Sam Kirby, host of Cinema Stories here on Public House Media. Thank you for tuning into the following broadcast here on Public House Media. Once you're done with this episode, I hope you'll come check out my show, Cinema Stories, where we talk about movie and TV news and reviews, and maybe, just maybe, we'll learn a little something about ourselves. If not, then maybe I made you laugh a couple of times. I don't know. New episodes air bi-weekly on Tuesdays. Thanks again for checking out the totally spectacular following broadcast here on Public House Media.
Hey everyone, welcome to Beauties and Headcanons, where we're nerdy and you probably are too. This is Emily and I'm here today with Lindsay and Elisabeth, and we're here to talk nerdy to you about, you probably guessed it already, Sherlock, as in Sherlock Holmes. We're going to definitely talk about the BBC series, but also discuss our thoughts on some of the other iterations of Sherlock Holmes as we've come to know and love the character. So, without further ado, here we go.
This episode is brought to you by Squadcast. As podcasters who all live in different states and different time zones, one of the most important things when we record, which we always do remotely, is the quality of our audio together. Current solutions like Skype, which we have used, and Zoom are dependent on our internet quality, but Squadcast is a simple browser-based tool that requires no additional software to install. We just click a link and we're good to go. The audio is recorded locally as high-quality WAV files and then magically uploaded to the guest's computer. We've been using them for a few weeks now, and we love the experience. To get started, go to squadcast.fm for your 14-day free trial.
All right, so full disclosure, I have seen 2 episodes of the BBC series. I can't remember the first episode I saw. I think it was in series 1. And then I saw the Reichenbach fall. That's all I've actually seen. But I am a huge, huge fan of Sherlock Holmes, in general. Going back to my little classic lit phase in high school, where I was just devouring all kinds of, classic stories. And Sherlock Holmes was one of them. Every book in the library I could find by Arthur Conan Doyle, I was just reading it.
Sir Arthur Conan Doyle.
Sir
Arthur Conan Doyle.
And one thing, this is a character that in general I'm pretty familiar with. So, even though I've only seen 2 episodes, I feel pretty confident talking about Sherlock in general.
Yeah. Well, and as a character, he's pretty iconic just in general. I even taught a forensic science class that mentioned Sherlock Holmes because of his forensic style in the literature.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, that was a very big point in all of the original stories, was all of all of the investigations that Sherlock did. It was always very, very thorough and very innovative.
That's awesome, yeah.
So he was very much into science.
Science is the best, though.
Well, and just to toss it out there, I am very literarily naive when it comes to Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson. I know of them, but only in a very vague way. And so I decided to start watching the show that just has Benedict Cumberbatch and who has Martin Freeman and Benedict Cumberbatch in it. So that's really all I know about Sherlock. So this is going to be a very interesting talk where we kind of all have our different angles that we're coming from.
Yeah. And my first experience with anything Sherlock Holmes was probably the Robert Downey Jr. and Jude Law movies. Because obviously I'd heard of him before that, but I didn't actually read any of the books, and I didn't watch anything that had been put out with Sherlock Holmes as a main character until those movies came out with Robert Downey Jr. and Jude Law.
Sure.
So We've kind of all got different starting points, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the things that I really like specifically about both Robert Downey Jr. and Benedict Cumberbatch is that, I mean, I really love their portrayals. I think RDJ narrowly kind of edges out as my favorite. But when an actor, takes on a role that has been done before, like, and is very well known, like Sherlock Holmes, in order to really play it well, an actor really needs to focus in on the character, draw out something that hasn't really quite been done before, and then run with it and make it their own. Heath Ledger, obviously, famously did this with his portrayal of the Joker. And I mean, whether you really like that or not, I mean, it's become a really iconic performance. So with RDJ's Sherlock, I feel that he really encompassed that wild and crazy and like seemingly impulsive, but not really nature of the original character. And then with Benedict Cumberbatch, he went in the complete opposite direction, and he grabbed onto the kind of depression, suffering, cold, slightly sociopathic side of Sherlock Holmes. And it really works because they're both two very distinct performances, and they both stand completely on their own, but they're both very, very good.
Yeah, and that's another thing I just love about the character Sherlock is that he is a complex character, and so anybody that portrays him, you kind of have to almost separate him out. It's hard to be all of Sherlock all at once.
Oh yeah, definitely. Because I mean, just like watching both RDJ and Benedict, like I could see callbacks to the stories I would read when I was in high school and reading all of these stories, because I could see, oh yeah, there's this crazy kind of hijinks having Sherlock, and then there's this kind of depressed, drug using sociopathic Sherlock, and it's all the same character, but to portray all of that in like one movie or even a series, it would be way too much. So I think they both did a good job in deciding what elements were important to their Sherlock and sticking to that.
Yeah, consistency.
Can I just mention too that like it's sort of like a different element now to that a couple of those scenes in Infinity War where you see Robert Downey Jr. and Benedict Cumberbatch kind of sparring. It's I'm tempted to kind of like just imagine what the two of them would be like being Sherlock in that kind of an environment. I can't help but laugh.
No,
about
I'm the real Sherlock.
Well, and what's funny too is when I watched an interview where Stephen Moffat and Mark Gatiss, the co-creators of Sherlock, were talking about having cast Benedict Cumberbatch, and they said he was like their perfect Sherlock. So I need to find out what exactly did you say that Robert Downey Jr. brought to Sherlock that was different than Benedict's?
RDJ was a lot more flamboyant and charismatic and a lot more kind of off the cuff.
Okay.
And he would do these things where it would look like he was just being impulsive, but he was always very carefully planning things out. So
yeah. Like, and then his Watson, Jude Law, was like, he's really not this crazy. He actually has a plan. Just kind of roll with it, and we'll find out as we go.
So that's a lot more subtle in the Sherlock series then, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a different angle to it. So it embraces the little bit more slightly, what I call the slightly sociopathic side of Sherlock, where he's just this kind of cold, calculating, deducing kind of person.
But to be fair, Elisabeth, I think you need to watch more episodes because I think he warms up. I don't know the third season and the fourth season. He's much. I wanted to argue later on in our talk that he gets a lot less sociopathic going forwards in the series than he is to begin with. I think Dr. Watson really brings that out of him. It makes him much less cold and calculating and much more lovable.
Well, yeah. I mean, the last episode that I saw was like the ending of series 2. So, I mean, I haven't had a chance to even see series 2. But, I mean, even if you like were just comparing the two, it's like, oh yeah, that he's definitely a lot colder. because
sure. Yeah.
Because RDJ's, like, I remember one of my favorite things was where he busted in on his Dr. Watson dressed as a woman because he'd snuck on the train that way. And he's full on acting like a woman, even though, he looks absolutely terrible. But, it's just him.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Jude Law is
He's
a very
not really
pretty
crazy.
man. So,
yeah. And that's another thing that I think is important when it comes to any portrayal of Sherlock is having a good Dr. Watson, because, no matter what other characters are in the series or, portrayed in either the stories or the movies or the series, Watson is always a consistent player. It's always Sherlock and Watson.
Right.
So you have to have really good portrayals of both characters, but you also have to have two actors that have really good chemistry together. And I mean, I love RDJ. I'm neutral on Jude Law, but they had a great chemistry together as Sherlock and Watson. And of course, I love Benedict and Martin pretty equally, and they also had a great chemistry together.
Yeah, I think like with both of them, the casting was fantastic for the respective aspects of Sherlock and Watson that they were portraying.
Switched them and say like Jude Law had gone with Benedict Cumberbatch, I don't think it would have worked at all.
No way.
The different ways that they portrayed them, it would not have meshed well, I don't think.
No, exactly. Because I think Jude Law played a little bit of a stronger Watson than Martin Freeman does. And
you have to be more straight man,
Yeah.
Yeah, there are points where Martin Freeman's Watson is very subtle, but also there are parts where he's very strong and very strong-willed as well. So not knowing what Jude Law as Dr. Watson was really, I can't say so much against it as much as like I love Martin Freeman and I love his Dr. Watson. So.
Oh yeah.
So do I. He's probably my favorite Dr. Watson.
Yeah. It's very like I watched these 3 episodes of them talking about the elements of the women, the elements of the villains, the elements of gosh, I don't remember what the other episode was, but there was 3 of them, and they talk about the different casting and the different elements of what they did with up to the end of season 3. And it was very interesting to hear them talk about how they cast Martin Freeman, how they cast Benedict Cumberbatch, and I thought it was very cool that they, really talked about the chemistry between the 2 characters, because you can have someone who is perfect for a role, but then if the other person isn't perfect to be played with that other perfect person in the role, then it's different. So. It's important that you talk about the way people view the casting and how they look at the characters. Because if they hadn't been casted well, if all of the characters hadn't been casted well, the show would not have lasted the way it did, and it wouldn't have such huge following.
No, well, and what I love about the series, the BBC series, is that like each episode feels like a movie.
Right. Well, it's an hour and a half long, so
yeah,
they definitely almost are.
It feels like you're in the show with them.
Yes.
Like the way that they incorporate text messages into the screen, so it's not like you're looking at someone's phone. It's like you're reading it on yours, and how like just the way the camera work is done, and even some of the like. The more subtle things, like the way the music is in the show, it just draws you in, and even like the lack of music sometimes too, because a lot of times in Sherlock it's very quiet, and that feels more real because real life doesn't have a soundtrack really.
Unfortunately, reality does not have a soundtrack.
I wish.
Background
music, theme music, anything. Oh, I love it.
Well, you're right. The cinematography is very cool too, where they do have the overlays of the text messaging. There's a scene where Dr. Watson is texting a woman, and it brings up the screen of his phone, and it's a picture of his wife, Mary, and their baby, and him together, and then he shows you this overlay of him texting someone, and it's very like telling as to how things are feeling. There's a very different feeling when you read the different messages and you see how they interact with each other. At some point, Sherlock says something about how he never responds to a text message that starts with hi, and I started laughing. Sherlock would never respond to any of my messages, let alone Dr. Watson's. Oh my goodness.
Oh man. Yeah. Well, and they do a great job of also, like you mentioned how there's the feeling there. You almost can like hear what they're thinking when they do it that way.
Right. Yeah, definitely. There's also a scene where they eliminate everybody else in the room because Sherlock is thinking. And so there's like little targets on each person's body until he realizes who it is that he's got to zero in on. And in that scene, it's very like yellow and teal, and all the people disappear except for this one person. And it's very well orchestrated. It's just a very cool thing to see. I don't know if in season 4 I liked so much that Sherlock ends up doing a lot more texting or tweeting. He's tweeting a lot, I guess. I don't know. There's a lot of tweeting going on in season 4, and I like that that's a thing, because in 2017 there's a lot more tweeting than there is in 2011 when they started. But at the same time,
there's like what I thought was interesting at the beginning of the series was like I didn't know that like Watson was blogging about Sherlock.
Right.
Like I realized that there was the relationship between Watson and Sherlock, how like Watson would kind of release a Sherlock story, but it was interesting how they made it more relevant that Watson was blogging about it instead of like a newspaper release or something.
Right. And I think that develops over time in the series. I don't think it starts from the way. But by the time they are in The Abominable Bride, by the time that they are relaying back to the story and how people enjoy reading his stories and people enjoy reading his, whether they go back into the late 1800s and they're talking about it being in the newspaper, or if they're talking about it being online, it's still very relevant, and it's still very like something that Dr. Watson does that Sherlock doesn't necessarily approve of, but also kind of thrives on too. So it's very modernized.
It plays into his ego, Sherlock's ego.
Of course.
And, you know, because he'll talk to Sherlock about it, and he'll be like, you didn't put that in there, did you? But he'll secretly, like, want it to be in there.
Right. And then he talks about, like, how part of it is what Dr. Watson says Sherlock is like, making him a likable and hero of the story, as opposed to how he really is, according to Watson, where he's not quite so likable and not quite so... it's
kind of
Benedict really plays a element of not so likable.
He really does. He's just socially oblivious.
Yes.
And like, especially when there's that cute little forensics girl who is into Sherlock and he has no idea. And she was obviously trying to like ask him out or something, and he just missed it entirely. And then Watson comes in and is like, hey, did you notice? And he does a great job. Martin Freeman does a great job of like somehow being the only person who can tolerate Sherlock's like Sherlockness and like still come back to him, even though they do have their fallings out. And even though like he knows that Sherlock's always going to be that way. He finally like comes to grips with it and says, all right, that's how it's going to be. And he's still my friend.
Yeah. No, I would argue that Mary ends up being able to tolerate Sherlock too. I think she...
Yeah, I would see that.
Yeah.
I could see that. Well, and her backstory too, I think helps her tolerate Sherlock a little bit better than most people, because she did have the secrecy and that sort of deal in her background.
Yeah, that is what I like that they, kind of pulled from the, original stories, was that, pretty much the only one who could really tolerate Sherlock for most of, the time that they were around him was John, and, later John's wife, obviously.
Right.
But, like, those are pretty much, like, the only people who would really put up with him.
Exactly. So, there's this episode called The Reichenbach Fall. It's the end of season 2, right? It's been a while since I've actually watched the show, but
Well, I think it's sort of like the end of series 2, the beginning of series 3, because it happens, but then you get to hear, you figure out what kind of happened. And those poor people that had to wait, how many years did they have to wait in between the two? I think it was 2 years between
I think
the two.
so. It was a while.
Yeah, it was.
Which gives you plenty of time to try and figure out how Sherlock was going to live. Like,
yeah, I kind of think it was one of those things where writers just kind of write themselves into a corner. And I mean, I've kind of been there in a way before. And then in the episode that followed it for the premiere of series 3, they kind of addressed it. Like, they gave their own scenario, but then like the way they ended, the way that they gave that scenario kind of left it open for debate as to whether it's really real or not. And I think that was just kind of like, we can't really decide. We don't really know. So yeah, this is just what we're going to put in the episode that happened.
Yeah. Well, and I could understand them doing that also from the audience perspective, because there had been so many theories that the audience had thought of during that time when they had to wait and figure out what was going on. And it kind of does leave it open for people's headcanons to remain intact if they want to.
I kind of wonder if they curated some ideas from the internet.
I wouldn't be surprised, like, hey, I there's this forum that's discussing this episode
for us, please.
Right? Help us.
So someone explained the waterfall to me then. I understand what happened with the Reichenbach fall. He actually ends up getting like that, some kind of like mattress inflated underneath him, and they incapacitate Dr. Watson so that he believes it, but doesn't actually see what happened with the truck going in front of him. I get that. But in the actual literary version, what is the waterfall and all of that? What is that?
Well, originally in the literary version, it was the Reichenbach Falls was a set of waterfalls in Switzerland, I believe it was. And it was set up a little bit similarly to the episode, which was where Moriarty had been putting out these things to kind of discredit Sherlock. Mm-hmm. And it all kind of culminated in Switzerland, and where Moriarty and Sherlock both fell seemingly to their deaths at the Reichenbach Falls.
Okay. And then in the literary version, does Moriarty actually die?
I don't think I really read much past that. If there is one, it's been so long since I read it. But I know in the second RDJ movie, they did kind of the same thing, basically, because it's, basically like the pinnacle of more or less the end of Sherlock's career, or is supposed to be. And in the movie version, Moriarty did die.
Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I thought it was there's a lot of like little quotey nuggets in the series in Sherlock where, they say, oh, it's not the fall that kills you, it's the landing. And Moriarty is so good to hate. Like, he's so fun.
Oh, yeah. He's really well played too.
Oh my goodness. And it's just so much it's so much fun to hate him. He's just like the perfect quirky evil villain. And even when he's like not being completely villainous, when he is playing the character he makes up to discredit Sherlock, he's almost likable. He's almost like someone you want to feel bad for. You don't in the end, but
it's just
I love to hate him.
Oh yeah, I love actors that can really bring that out in the characters, because
and Magnuson too, same thing. Just what about the girl who plays Sherlock's woman, Irene Adler? Any feedback on her? Maybe you guys. I don't know, Elisabeth, if you even got to see her very much.
Yeah.
No, I didn't really.
Okay.
So I only know her through like the movie. So, and I mean, the writings, but I don't really know anything about her through the BBC version.
Okay.
Yeah, I thought she did a great job. I don't know much about like who she was canonically as far as the original writings go.
Sure.
But She was a very interesting woman of intrigue, for sure.
Yeah, in the show, they make her into a dominatrix.
Yeah.
All these secrets to tell about the men that she's been with. And she always says she knows what they like. I know what he likes. That kind of thing.
Like, oh, do you now?
Right. So it's very implied, that these guys don't like anything that's terribly savory, really, or something that, things you would do behind closed doors. But I do think it's interesting that she's the one that Sherlock calls the woman. And I still am not 100% sure if she's actually dead or if she's not. Because there's a lot of fantasy and intrigue in the show. There's a lot of different plot lines, different storylines that could be also going on.
Stephen Moffat.
Yes. Oh, I know.
Need we say more?
There really nothing more needs to be said.
Exactly.
Yeah. I will say that I loved the episode with the what was it? The Mind Palace.
Yes.
Is that what it's called? Where it's like a memory hook where you can store essentially infinite amounts of information in your mind, and but by using imagining a room and imagining different things in the room, and there was a villain who had all these secrets on people, but he remembered everything perfectly, but he didn't have anything physical to show for it. He just knew everything about everybody perfectly in his memory. And then Sherlock used that as well against him in the end, I think. And it was just so interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's interesting all around, basically, to think about how these guys store this information. I always make jokes about how you can't teach an old dog new tricks, and how things when I'm at work, I can't really reevaluate, or I can't relearn them to do them a different way, because I've already stored the way to do them the way that I do them. And Sherlock actually says something like that in one of the episodes where he says, "Oh, I have to free up some space." And that's how I feel most of the time. So I totally related, having to, when you have only so much space left to take up the information you need. And he talks about how obviously being a genius, a sociopath, all of the things that he is, the element that he has of only being able to store the pertinent information, the useful information is very cool. It's very different. It's not something we're used to seeing in a character.
True.
And I think that has a lot to do with how he's portrayed as someone who's unapproachable to so many.
Mm-hmm. Anything else we want to mention?
I don't know. How many more episodes do you have to watch? I have 2 episodes to watch. Obviously, Elisabeth needs to watch the whole thing over again, next year when she's got time.
I believe I finished season 3, so I need to do season 4.
Yeah, I feel like I'm missing out on a whole bunch because I haven't watched season 4 yet either. But I do love how we have an entire thing that's based off of something we already know. Obviously there's a very vague idea of who Sherlock Holmes was, who Dr. Watson was. It's kind of ingrained into our memories as to something we know was written in a classical sense. Obviously, Elisabeth has read those books, and I haven't, and you haven't, but we really have these very different ideas of what's going to happen. And I found out actually Stephen Moffat, I think, is also working on Dracula. So, there's these French guys that are just hanging out somewhere in London, and they're trying to figure out how to bring these literary characters back to life. So I think it's really cool that this happened. And
I kind of like how they bring, some of these characters into the modern era, because obviously, as much as I absolutely love the RDJ version, and as much as I love classical literature, period pieces are not for everyone. But to take these characters, into the modern era and kind of integrate them into, what it would be like if they were living during this era, I really, really like the idea. And maybe that's just the fanfic reader and writer in me. But
No, I like that too, because it brings the same themes and the same ideas of all of that writing.
Mm-hmm.
It makes it more relevant and makes it
more accessible.
Yeah.
Oh, right. And they do that in that one episode of Sherlock, The Abominable Bride. It's a little hard to follow. I think I've watched it twice now, and it's I could probably watch it again and still pick out stuff I didn't notice the first time. But they go,
it's a tricky one,
and they take Dr. Watson and Sherlock and all of the characters, and they, project them into the late 1800s. So you see their imagining of them from that period of time, and at the end, they sort of have Sherlock and Watson talk about that era, and Sherlock is like, oh, these flying devices, and you really think that that's how it would be? And Dr. Watson's like, oh yeah, I think I would. No, I think Sherlock says that he would be totally at home in that kind of an environment. He could totally see himself there. And the other, whichever one it is, says, oh no, I don't think that would ever be feasible for us. I also really like how they incorporated some of the things we know Sherlock said in the literary versions too, where he says, oh, elementary, my dear Watson. That kind of stuff was really cool to hear Benedict say. Do they have Robert Downey Jr. say that too?
From what I remember, yes. It's been a while.
Probably.
Movies.
I feel like I have some movies to watch now.
Yes, I think you do. You might also have some episodes of Star Trek TNG to watch as well with Data.
Yes, because that is one of the things he really likes to do is to go into and play out Sherlock as if he is Sherlock.
Stop it! Really?
Exactly. Oh, he loves it. Yeah. Data loves to figure out humans.
Okay.
Because he's an android. And so he, in order to figure out what makes humans tick, he plays Sherlock Holmes in the Sherlock Holmes mysteries and uses Sherlock as a model to figure out humans. It's so cool.
Cool.
Yeah. I love it. And one of the episodes is called It's Elementary, Dear Data, I think.
Yes. That is a really good episode.
It's a good one.
Yeah, and I think the perfect way to kind of segue into our nerd news section that we're going to be doing this episode.
Yeah, we don't have any Star Trek news, but we do have Star Wars news. It's been announced and confirmed that some new actors have confirmed roles in Star Wars 9. I don't know if an official title of this next Star Wars movie has been confirmed yet, but we do know that Matt Smith, former actor for the Doctor in Doctor Who, and Dom Monaghan, is that how you say it? Dom Monaghan, former Hobbit, former character on the show Lost, among other actors and actresses, have confirmed roles in Star Wars 9. Matt Smith is said to be playing a key character as well. So we shall see how things play out. I don't know. They haven't released any of their actual roles yet, but we do know that they're in there. And as both of them being of British nationality, I guess you could say, they are, it'll be interesting seeing who they are in there. Because right now, in the newer Star Wars movies, the British ones seem to be evil or on the side of the of the order. So
which is very similar to the original too. True.
So we'll see if Matt Smith keeps his accent or if he doesn't, or if he's one of the articles I read was maybe he'll be one of the three options that'll be Rey's father, and she'll decide out they'll meet together on an island like they did in Mamma Mia. And but yeah, and also Carrie Fisher will be Leia Organa through archival unreleased footage that they recorded when they did Star Wars 8 as well. So she will make an appearance, although she has passed. Leia will be in the next movie as well. Also, these are the last 2 weeks of League of Legends Championship Series. The North American League of LCS starts or is in the final weeks. The semifinals are this weekend on Saturday and Sunday, with Cloud9 versus TSM on Saturday at 2 p.m. Pacific. And then on Sunday, 100 Thieves versus Team Liquid at 3 p.m. So this week is the semifinals. The losers of these games face off for third place next week, and the winners will go head to head in the final championship. So we will find out whether it'll be 100 Thieves versus C9, 100 Thieves versus TSM, Team Liquid versus TSM, Team Liquid versus C9. We don't know how things will play out, but we will definitely be keeping you up to date next week, and we will let you know who's going up against whom. And hopefully it'll be some pretty good matches. We will see.
And speaking of video games, I think older video game nerds will be really pumped to hear that the trailer for Streets of Rage 4 has officially dropped. It's been almost 25 years since we've had a Streets of Rage game, and the beloved franchise is officially coming back. And from the looks of the trailer, it looks like it's keeping a lot of the familiar elements of the original. They have a couple of the original characters coming back, Axel and Blaze. So this is going to be really, really fun, I think. They haven't announced what platforms it's going to be on or the release date, but obviously, we're pretty excited to know that it's coming. And on that note, why don't you talk nerdy to us? Which Sherlock Holmes have you seen, and which is your favorite? You can find Beauties and Headcanons on Facebook, Twitter, and Tumblr to share your nerdy topic suggestions. Subscribe to this podcast and others from Public House Media on iTunes, Spreaker, iHeartRadio, and wherever good podcasts are found. We also love feedback, so if you like this episode, or even if you didn't, please just give us a rating and a review so we can keep making great episodes for you. I'm Elisabeth.
I'm Emily.
And I'm Lindsay. And thanks for getting nerdy with us today on Beauties and Headcanons.